England, the year 1326. Along the cold stone walls of Windsor Castle, torchlight flickers like the heartbeat of those who know too much. Queen Isabella of France, the young wife of King Edward II, is preparing for a night history will never forget. A night of betrayal, a night of farewell, a night when music will become her final goodbye. And you are not a general, you are not a noble. You are a court musician, a lute player in the shadowed halls, summoned not to command, but to listen. Tonight, you will play one last song for the queen who is about to betray her king. You don't yet know that the melody you carry will mark the end of a love and the prelude to a rebellion that will shake the crown. If you find meaning in stories buried beneath history, if you're drawn to the nameless souls, the quiet ones who stood in the shadows, like this video, subscribe to the channel, because behind every great page of history, there is always someone whose name was never written. There is a hush to the stone corridors tonight, a silence that feels shaped, deliberate as if the very walls are holding their breath. The torchlight flickers on limestone worn smooth by noble feet and royal secrets, casting golden tremors on dark velvet drapes. Somewhere far off, a servant coughs, footsteps echo softly, then vanish, and then music. Not bold, not triumphant, a whisper of sound, tender as a prayer. It weaves beneath the carved arches like ivy, a melody too soft to disturb, too precise to be accidental. And it is yours. You sit on the low stool in the side passage just beyond the great hall, where the court feasts and toasts and plots under the cover of laughter. They don't see you. Not really. You are the background, the harmony to their theater of power. Your lute rests lightly against your chest as your fingers coax out the tune Queen Isabella once told. You reminded her of May mornings in Paris, though she said it with a smile that seemed haunted. She isn't in the hall tonight. You noticed. You always notice. The song you play was not requested. No one asks. Not anymore. You learned long ago that if you played too poorly, you were forgettable. If you played too well, you were dangerous. So you found the middle path, invisible excellence. Music like perfume, gentle, pleasing, vanishing. The door opens. Your fingers still. A noble woman with rouged cheeks and a gloved hand pokes her head out, giggles at something behind her, and disappears again. A goblet clinks. Someone recites bad poetry. The door closes. You keep playing. And then you hear it. Your name. It's not shouted, nor whispered. Spoken clearly. Cool and deliberate. And unmistakably from her. You rise too quickly. The lute slips slightly, and you catch it just before it falls. Your hands are suddenly damp. You haven't heard your name spoken by her lips in weeks. She's been distant, cold, smiling only for her ladies-in-waiting, walking arm in arm with them in the gardens where once she had asked you softly, urgently, to show her the chords of a new melody. And now she's here. You step into the corridor and bow, deeply. The Queen of England stands alone, without her usual entourage. No guards, no duenna, just her. Isabella of France, daughter of Philip IV, sister to the current King of France, wife to Edward II, mother to the heir, and yet somehow always apart from the grandeur that surrounds her. She is dressed plainly, but the simplicity is deceptive. A gown of deep blue silk with faint gold threading, a sheer veil draped across her shoulders like a whispered warning. She watches you. "I want to hear the song again," she says. There is no need to ask which. She turns, and you follow her without a word. You walk behind her through the torchlit maze of Windsor Castle's inner chambers. Your heart pounds, but you make no sound. Only the soles of her slippers and the brush of your instrument case betray your passage. Finally, she opens the door to her solar and steps inside. You hesitate on the threshold. She looks back. "Close it." You obey. The solar is warm, scented faintly with rose and smoke. A brazier glows near the tapestry of St. Margaret. One high window lets in the night. A single candle burns beside the writing desk, where parchment lies scattered like fallen leaves. You recognize her hand, elegant, meticulous, unbroken. She gestures to the stool beside the hearth. "Sit." You set down the case and draw out the lute, letting your fingers fall into the shape of that familiar progression. D, a minor, G, then a pause. But she doesn't sit. She stands with her back to you, looking into the fire. "Do you know," she says softly, "that the roses in the garden bloomed early this year? They say it is a good omen. I think it is just the earth trying to be kind before something unkind happens." You say nothing. She turns to you, then takes a step forward. Her face is not made up, her hair braided simply, a few wisps escaping. Her eyes, always heavy with a gaze too old for her youth, now shimmer with something unreadable. Grief, maybe, or resolve. "I should not have summoned you," she murmurs, "but I wanted one thing tonight to be beautiful." You don't dare ask what she means. You only nod and begin to play. The melody fills the room. It curls along the rafters, slips into the cracks of the old stone, and drapes itself across her shoulders. Her eyes close. She does not sway, does not speak, only listens. You remember the first time you played it for her, how she had turned from the window and said, That is what memory sounds like. It had made you bold. That night, when she offered you a plum from her plate, and your fingers brushed hers, she hadn't pulled away. Now, you are not bold. Now, you are only afraid. As you play, she sits beside the hearth, hands in her lap. Her breathing changes. You glance up once and see her lips move, silent, mouthing something you cannot hear. A name, a prayer, a goodbye. The song ends. You wait. Then she rises. "Come here." You set the lute down gently, cross the room, and stand before her. She reaches up slowly and touches your face. Her palm is warm. Your breath catches. "You were never meant to be here," she says. You nod. "And yet," she continues, "I cannot imagine this night without you." She leans in, and her forehead touches yours, just for a moment. And then the knock. Sharp, not frantic, but urgent. She pulls away, all softness gone. In its place, steel. Yes, she calls. "Your Grace," comes a voice muffled by the heavy oak. The hour is upon us. She breathes in, deeply, then looks at you with eyes that suddenly seem older than any queen's ought to be. "You must leave, tonight." You open your mouth to protest, but she raises a hand. "No. There are things I cannot protect you from. Dispenser watches everything. My husband has grown cruel in his weakness. She crosses the room and opens a chest. From it, she retrieves a small parcel wrapped in waxed cloth. This must go to Normandy. There is a merchant waiting at the port in Dover. His name is Jacques Ballon. He'll know what to do. Tell no one. You take the parcel. Your fingers tremble. You won't come with me. She shakes her head. I must stay. For now. Another knock. Louder. She walks to the door, opens it a crack, and speaks in hushed tones to someone unseen. Then she closes it and turns to you once more. I asked you here tonight, she says, not because I needed music, but because I needed to remember what it was to be listened to. Your throat is dry, and tomorrow. Her voice softens. Tomorrow is war. You leave through the servants' passage, escorted by a mute man in gray. No one sees you go. The castle murmurs behind you, a palace of ghosts and ambition. You step into the night air, and it feels colder than it should. In your hand is the Queen's farewell. You tuck it beneath your cloak and walk fast, past the chapel, where candles flicker beside statues too blind to weep, past the stables, where horses whicker in uneasy sleep, past the armory, where steel dreams of blood. You do not look back. The road to Dover is narrow and winding, a ribbon of mud and gravel that clings to the edges of shadowed forests and quiet, wind-lashed hills. You travel on foot, as instructed, no carriage, no retinue, nothing that might draw the eyes of those loyal to the king. The Queen's letter lies tucked against your chest beneath layers of wool, its presence a weight heavier than your lute. It feels like a heartbeat you do not own. The moon hangs low behind gray clouds, casting a sullen, milky glow across the countryside. England in November is a place of hush. The harvest has passed. The fields lie bare, and the trees, stripped of their leaves, reach toward the sky like fingers pleading with a silent God. Each footstep you take is muffled by wet earth, and yet you feel watched. You pass no one for miles. Occasionally, the bark of a dog or the rustle of a fox startles you into gripping your lute case like a weapon. It is absurd, and yet you cannot laugh. Not now. Not with that parcel pressed to your ribs. Not with the Queen's voice echoing behind your ears. There are things I cannot protect you from. It is not your first time running through the countryside with a secret, but it is the first time the secret could cost a throne. Or your head. At sunrise, you reach a small village with a stone bridge and a sullen inn whose shutters tremble in the wind. The innkeeper eyes you with suspicion. Musicians rarely travel without coin, and you've already lied once today, told a farmer you were heading to a wedding in Canterbury. And no, you hadn't heard about the raids. Raids. He hadn't clarified. You hadn't asked. Inside the inn, you warm your hands by the hearth, take weak ale, and feign sleep in the corner while listening. Most men are talking of the harvest or the strange weather. One mentions Queen Isabella, calls her that French witch. Another curses the dispensers, then glances around to see if anyone heard. No one speaks of Edward. That silence is louder than words. You press onward. The wind stiffens. You stay off the main road when you can, walking narrow sheep tracks across open hills where no man watches. Twice you see mounted men in the distance armored, bearing no visible crest, and you crouch in the brush until they pass. On the third day, the sea appears. It's sudden, almost biblical. One moment you are cresting a rise above a scrubby field. The next, The earth drops into chalky cliffs, and there it lies, the English Channel, gray and endless, wind-raked and cold. The gulls wheel overhead in crooked spirals, and you breathe salt. The sight nearly brings you to your knees, not for its beauty, but for what it means. You are closer to the end of your task, and to the beginning of something else. Dover town is a patchwork of sloped streets, wooden homes, and low-towered churches. Its harbor is busy, more than it should be. Soldiers roam the piers, speaking in harsh voices and inspecting crates. The king's men. You avoid them. A boy is beaten for slipping away without license. A merchant protests the confiscation of his wine. You keep your head down and search for the contact the queen named, Jacques Bellon. You ask around carefully, as if seeking a fellow musician, a contact for a French wedding. Most shake their heads. Then a baker's apprentice with flour on his sleeves mutters, "Try the salt house by the old anchor." He comes there at dusk. You wait until dusk. The salt house smells of brine, smoke, and desperation. Fish scales litter the floor. In one corner, men drink thick beer and pretend not to gamble. You keep to the shadows, playing a soft tune on your lute. Something simple, the kind of tune that melts suspicion. He comes at last short, balding, broad of shoulder, with a limp that tells you he's spent years aboard ships not made for comfort. He leans on a cane and orders wine he doesn't drink. You recognize him from the Queen's vague description. He limps, he never smiles, and he wears a coin of Saint Denis around his neck. You glimpse the coin just beneath his collar. You finish your song and approach. His eyes flick to you once, then back to his untouched cup. "I know what you carry," he says without ceremony. You shift the lute slightly, do you? "You're early. The Queen must be moving faster than the rumors." He doesn't ask to see the letter, doesn't even glance at your case. Instead, he rises, tosses a coin on the table, and limps toward the rear exit. You follow. Outside, he speaks low. "There's a ship, French crew, small, fast. They'll cross tomorrow at dawn. You'll board with the barrels of salt cod. Say nothing." You nod. Then he fixes you with a stare. "Do not open it." You blink. The parcel. He leans closer. It is not just a letter. It is strategy. If Dispenser catches you with it, they will not bother with a trial. You swallow hard. Jacques gives a curt nod and limps off. The night is bitter. You sleep in the loft of a fish shed, curled beside nets and the smell of rot. Sleep is thin, haunted by dreams of footsteps, and red wax, and a lute string snapping into silence. You wake often. Once, you think you hear hoofbeats and press yourself flat against the boards. But morning comes. The boat is small, barely more than a fishing craft, but fast. Its crew speaks only Breton and French. You are placed among the barrels and covered with tarpaulin. It's suffocating. You try not to cough. Salt stings your eyes. The wind rises. By midday, you are across France. You stumble onto a dock with jelly legs and a mouth full of sea. No one greets you. No one asks your name. Jacques had told you to go inland, to a monastery near Dieppe. There, someone will take the parcel. That is all. You don't question it. The road inland is gentler than England's, but colder. France in November is like glass, beautiful, but brittle. You pass carts of onions, women selling lavender, boys herding goats. A night rides by without acknowledging you. No one looks too closely. At the monastery, a quiet place of stone and ivy, nestled among orchards stripped bare, you present the parcel to a monk with a lopsided tonsure and sharp eyes. He weighs it in his palm, then looks at you. She trusted you with this. You nod. He tilts his head. Then perhaps you are more than a song. He disappears without another word. You are not invited to stay. You sleep in a hayloft nearby and dream, again, of her face by firelight. You spend several weeks in Normandy. Not idle, you perform where you can, exchanging music for food and shelter, moving often. But you begin to hear whispers. The Queen has returned to France. She has brought her son the Prince with her. She has not asked permission of her husband. And with her comes Roger Mortimer. The name is like the sound of a sword being drawn. Mortimer, the exile. Mortimer, the rebel. Mortimer, who escaped the tower with silk sheets and vengeance in his eyes. They say he dines at her table. They say she does not dine alone. You play in taverns where merchants drink deeply and speak too freely, and every tale you hear confirms what you already suspect. The Queen is not idle. She is gathering money, men, support. An invasion is not just likely, it is inevitable. You begin to understand what the parcel held. You begin to understand why she kissed you only once. One afternoon, in a market square outside Rouen, you see her. Not closely, not near, but you know her gait, the way her hand adjusts her veil, the tilt of her head when she listens, the way she speaks without smiling. She is riding a white horse. Mortimer rides beside her. People bow. You do not. You hide, not out of shame, not out of fear, but because the sight of her changed, armored by something you cannot name, breaks something in you. You do not follow her. You do not call out. But that night, when you play in the courtyard of a kindly widow's house, the melody changes, becomes darker, slower, and no one notices. No one ever does. You return to England the way a shadow returns to a wall, silent, unnoticed, drawn back not by desire but by something colder, necessity. Months have passed. Winter has passed. And with the thawing of the roads comes word that the Queen's silence has ended. You come ashore not at Dover, but farther north, under a different name, and with a lute case full of nothing but songs. You carry no parcel now, only memories, and the knowledge that something immense has begun to move behind the curtains of the realm. England, you find, is quieter than you remembered, but not in the way of peace. It is the quiet of watching eyes, of soldiers at crossroads, of notices nailed to church doors warning of sedition and harboring traitors. The king's men still ride, still question, still hang, but the names whispered in taverns have changed. Where once you heard only Despenser and Edward, now you hear Isabella and Mortimer. You do not hear your own name. That should comfort you. It doesn't. You make your way back to Windsor by long and winding roads, performing in inns where no one asks questions and sleeping in barns where mice nibble at the hems of your cloak. Once, you play for a knight and his wife at a private feast. The knight's coat bears the badge of the Despenser family. You smile, play well, bow twice, and leave before the wine is poured. There are soldiers at Windsor now, more than before, and fewer nobles. The court has thinned. Many have gone to their estates. Others have disappeared entirely. The air inside the castle is colder than the weather outside. You do not know if the queen is here. You do not ask. Instead, you resume your place behind pillars, beside tapestries, beneath the weight of your own silence. Your fingers dance over strings as they always have. But your thoughts do not. They stray, backward, to France, to her. You have not seen her since the day in Rouen. You wonder if she saw you. One morning, you are summoned to the Queen's solar, but not by her. A page delivers the message. No seal, no escort, just a whisper. Her Grace wishes for music. You pause, long enough that the boy looks at you twice, but then you nod. When you arrive, she is not there. Instead, you are greeted by her lady-in-waiting, a young woman with ash-blonde hair and the kind of eyes that have learned to see too much. She tells you the queen has been delayed. You wait, and as you wait, you notice something strange. The tapestries have been changed. Gone are the depictions of saints and parables. In their place, scenes of war, French knights, castles under siege, queens holding banners. It is not subtle. You begin to play, not the queen's melody, not the one she always requested, a different one, older, a tune from your childhood, something your father taught you in a field full of bees and wild thyme, something innocent. When she enters, you do not see her at first. Only the lady rises, curtsies, and leaves. Then the hush of silk, the faint sound of a door clicking shut. You glance up. She is dressed in gray. No crown, no jewels. Nothing that marks her as monarch. Only her presence undeniable, and heavy with something unspoken. You change the tapestries, you say before you can stop yourself. She smiles, not with joy. I tired of parables. You stand. She walks to the window, looks out. Do you know what day it is, she asks. You hesitate. March the 15th. She nods once. The IDs. Romans were always so poetic about death. Weren't they? You do not answer. She turns. I need you again. She gives you a name, Edric of Warham. A merchant, wealthy, ambitious, nervous. He is suspected of sympathies, not with her, but with them. The dispensers, the king, the old order. She needs to know where he stands. I cannot be seen questioning him, she says, but you, they think you are harmless. She does not ask if you are willing. She only says it, then waits. You nod, and so you play your part once more. Edric of Warham lives in a manor west of London, nestled in a bend of the river, where swans drift like painted boats, and servants do not speak unless spoken to. You arrive posing as a traveling musician, sent from court to perform at his wife's name-day celebration. He accepts you. Barely. He is a tall man with soft hands and suspicious eyes. He asks too many questions. He doesn't trust you. But he trusts music. They always do. You stay for 3 days. Long enough to hear the way he talks to his steward, to see the scrolls he keeps hidden in the drawer of his desk, to learn the routes his ships take and the names of those he fears. You report it all back. She listens with that same stillness she always has. At the end, she says, he will not live to see May. You ask, why do you trust me? She looks at you then, really looks, because when I sent you away, you came back. That summer, the air thickens, not just with heat, but with tension. There are rumors of ships off the coast, French ships, of letters intercepted, of lords refusing the king's summons, of Edward himself retreating to Despenser's stronghold in the west. You see her less and less. When you do, she is surrounded by advisors, by knights, by parchment, and by Mortimer. He is always close. They never touch in public, never speak without formality, but you see it in the way he listens to her, in the way she doesn't flinch when he disagrees. They are no longer building something. They are preparing to strike. One night, you are summoned again. She meets you not in her solar, but in the garden, under moonlight, beside a pond where swans sleep with one eye open. You once asked what would come after, she says. You nod, and you said war. She smiles faintly. It is almost here. She hands you a coin. It is not money. It is a seal, small, gold, bearing her crest and that of her son. You may need this, she says. If things go poorly, it may be the only proof you were ever on the right side. You turn it in your hand, and if I lose it, she meets your eyes, then may your music be beautiful enough to save you. It happens faster than anyone expects. Late August, the Queen lands in Suffolk, not with an army, but with a fleet of allies and her son at her side. Edward flees. Despenser panics. You do not go with her. You are told to stay, to watch, to play. You obey. And what you see in the days that follow is something no song can quite contain. The nobles begin to switch sides, not all at once, but like dominoes quiet, fatal. They abandon Edward. They ride to Isabella. She becomes not just queen, but standard-bearer, the mother of England's hope, and the wife of its ruin. She marches. She takes towns. The people cheer. And then she captures her husband. You are not there when it happens. You hear it sung, drunkenly, by a boy in the street, then whispered by a baker's daughter who asks if the queen really rides in silver. Edward is imprisoned. Despenser is hanged. You are forgotten, exactly as she intended. At court, the mood turns soft, almost festive. Nobles return. Banners change. Coins are minted with the prince's face, and you are once again invited to play. No one questions your presence now. They assume you were always on the right side, but you know better. You watch her from afar, Isabella, the queen regent, seated beside her son. She does not look at you, not once. You tell yourself that is how it must be. And still, when you return to your chamber each night, you find yourself holding the seal she gave you, just to make sure it's still there. Just to remind yourself she remembers. Autumn returns as it always does in England slowly, like a hesitant guest stepping over a threshold. The leaves yellow at the edges. The air turns damp with a bite that lingers in your sleeves, and the days shrink so gradually you almost don't notice until you look up and realize night has arrived before supper. But this year, autumn feels different, less like the end of summer and more like the beginning of something heavier, a season not of rest but of reckoning, You remain at court. No one questions your presence now. With the king gone and the Despensers disgraced, the castle has reshuffled itself. The queen's allies occupy the halls once held by Edward's creatures, and many of the old musicians, those who sang too loud for the wrong masters, have vanished without explanation. You suspect some were imprisoned, others fled. A few may even be buried beneath unmarked stones. But you are still here, still moving like smoke through the galleries and corridors, still plucking soft notes beneath royal conversation, still invisible in a way that now feels more like armor than anonymity. You play at meals, at weddings, even once at the baptism of a distant noble's child, though the infant screamed so terribly you nearly dropped your lute. And always, you watch her. Isabella. She walks now with a different rhythm, not the graceful caution of a woman surviving a hostile court, but the firm, practiced stride of someone who has become the court's gravity. People bend toward her when she speaks. Nobles shift their alliances when she frowns. Even the clergy, once wary of her foreign blood and quiet scandals, now speak her name with reverence, or at least with careful neutrality. She does not smile often, but when she does, it is the kind of smile that silences rooms. You remember when her smile was quieter, more fragile, something she gave only in private moments, when your fingers touched the strings just right, or when your voices overlapped softly while humming the last line of a song. That smile is gone. Perhaps it was never yours to begin with. You learn, piece by piece, how it all unfolded. The dispenser's father and son met their ends swiftly. The elder was hanged and then beheaded, his remains scattered across the land like grim confetti. The younger was dragged through the streets, torn apart, not just by executioners, but by rumor, by memory, by all those who hated him and now had permission to say so. Edward II was captured near Neath Abbey, betrayed by those he once considered loyal. He was stripped of his crown, confined, and though not yet executed, declared unfit to rule. A parchment read aloud in the great hall detailed his crimes: favoritism, incompetence, cruelty. It stopped just short of naming him mad. But everyone heard the word anyway. And now, the boy Prince Edward is King Edward III. Nominally, he is 14. Isabella rules in his name. You see them sometimes together, mother and son, seated beside each other in audiences and ceremonies. He listens when she speaks. He signs where she directs. He tries, you think, to understand what has been placed upon his shoulders. But he is still a boy, and she is no longer just a queen. She is something else, a monarch in all but name. And yet, with every step she ascends, you feel her retreating, not from power, from you. There are rumors, of course, about her and Mortimer. They are rarely seen alone together, yet their influence on one another is unmistakable. His fortunes rise as hers do. His lands grow. His titles multiply. And those who once whispered about their alliance with suspicion now speak of it with something closer to fear. He is not cruel, at least not outwardly. He moves through court with the practiced ease of someone who has survived worse than gossip. But his eyes are always scanning, calculating, weighing. He nods at you once, after a banquet, just once. You do not know if he recognizes your face, your music, your name, or if he simply knows who she used to call for when the halls were quieter and the nights longer. You nod back. It is not a greeting. It is an understanding. One evening, you are summoned, not by her, and not to her solar, but to the Queen's private chapel, a narrow room filled with the scent of beeswax and old incense. A priest waits inside, robed in black, his eyes sunken, his mouth dry. He gestures for you to sit. She arrives a moment later. This time, she does not dismiss the priest, Instead, she kneels before the altar. You remain still, and then she begins to speak not to you, not to the priest, but to God. She confesses, not in the formal, liturgical language of the Latin rite, but in soft French, her mother tongue, her voice trembling in ways you have not heard in years. She speaks of guilt, of ambition, of the weight of choices. She does not name names. She does not speak of murder. But she speaks of betrayal, of silence, of the things one must bury to survive. You watch her back as she prays. You remember tracing the laces of that same gown, once, by firelight. You wonder if she remembers that too. Afterward, she stands. She does not turn to you. She only says, "Do you think God listens to queens?" You do not answer. She leaves before you can try. The wind changes again. You begin to hear things whispers beneath whispers. That Mortimer is growing too bold. That the young king resents his mother's hand on his crown. That Parliament stirs with unease. That the Queen's victory has begun to curdle. You are not surprised. You know power has an appetite, and you know it rarely stops with the first course. Still you play, still you watch, but you also begin to prepare. One night, you find a letter beneath your door. No seal, no signature, just 3 lines, written in a hand you recognize. Leave court within 3 days. Do not return to Windsor. Do not look for me. You burn the letter, not out of obedience, but because keeping it would break you. You tell no one, not even the kitchen boy who sometimes brings you pastries unasked, not even the old steward who once joked that your music was the only reason he hadn't drowned himself in the Thames. You simply disappear, like smoke. You travel north. You perform in small towns, villages untouched by royal politics. You find that people are hungry for songs not just of war and glory, but of tenderness, of regret. They want to remember a time when the world made sense, or at least when it hurt less. You give them that. Your fingers are older now, your voice too. But your music is truer than it ever was. You think of her sometimes. You think of her always. One autumn morning, years later, you sit beneath an old tree outside York, tuning your lute beside a ruined wall when a stranger approaches a rider with travel-stained boots and a cloak of fine wool. He says nothing at first, only watches you play. Then he hands you a pouch. Inside silver coins and lilies. White, fresh, cut that morning. He says, simply, from her grace. You try to ask more, but he is already gone. You receive the same offering each year. Always in autumn. Always without a note. Always with lilies. One year it does not come. You know before the frost sets in that it will not. You do not need to ask why. You do not play that day. You sit by the fire, holding your lute, and remember the way her voice sounded on that last night, not when she asked you to deliver the letter, not when she spoke in chapel, but when she whispered, "I needed something beautiful." You were that something, and perhaps that is enough. You live quietly now. The castle is behind you, and so are the whispers. No more dark corridors or candlelit summons. No more glances shared across tapestries or songs woven with subtext. In your small cottage on the edge of a woodland path outside York, there is only the rhythm of rain against the roof, the rustle of deer in the brush, and the steady, patient creak of wood contracting in the cold. No one here knows your story. To them, you are the music man, an aging troubadour who plays in the square on market days and men's instruments in a shop that smells of cedar shavings and dried mint. The children watch your hands when you play, and the older folk nod, mistaking the sorrow in your melodies for age. They do not guess that you once watched a queen weep without tears, or carried in your coat the letter that broke a kingdom. You do not correct them, you smile, and you play. And when the song is finished, you pass the cap, and you bow. Sometimes, when the sun slants just right through the smoke of late autumn fires, you hear it again, her voice, wrapped in velvet and ash, saying your name as though it were a prayer. You remember the way she leaned against the window frame in the Queen's solar, her arms crossed, pretending not to watch you. The way she would press her thumb into her palm when she was lying. The way she never asked for more than music, but gave you more than song in return. Now she is gone. The messenger never returned. The lilies never came. And still you wait, each autumn, without admitting it aloud. You tell yourself that you are not waiting. You lie well. You've had practice. The world beyond your little circle moves on, as it always does. News reaches you in odd fragments, a traveling merchant with a talent for gossip, a priest whose sermons drift off into royal digressions. You learn that the young king, Edward III, has cast off his mother's influence, that Roger Mortimer was arrested in his sleep at Nottingham Castle, dragged from his bed in disgrace, and tried for treason. The Queen's lover, they called him, her shadow, her wolf. He was hanged on a Monday. They say she pleaded for his life. They say her son would not look at her when she wept. She was taken to Castle Rising in Norfolk. Not a prison. Not exactly, but not freedom either. A gilded cage, watched by guards who called her your grace with bowed heads and sharp eyes. You do not know what she thinks of, sitting in those halls of wind and quiet. You do not know if she thinks of you, but you know what you would say if she asked. You would say that you still play her melody, that you remember every step of the dance she never danced, that the scar on your left thumb, the one you got restraining a snapped lute string the night before you smuggled her letter to France, still aches in the cold. And you would say that you forgave her, long before she ever needed it, because she never truly lied to you. Not about what you were, not about what you weren't, not about how the world works when power changes hands and love is no shield at all. The seasons turn. You spend the next few years slowly becoming part of the landscape. Children grow up and ask if you'll teach them a few chords. You do. Farmers ask if you know anything lively to quicken the harvest. You do. The abbey up the hill pays you to repair a set of cracked vials. You work by lamplight, your fingers stained with resin and glue. Your body begins to slow. Your hands stiffen in winter. Your voice grows softer, but your memory remains intact, sharp and bright and full of ghosts. And then, one morning, a rider comes. It is just before sunrise. The rider does not speak at first. He wears the black and gold of the royal post, but his face is drawn, tired from travel. He dismounts, reaches into his satchel, and holds out a folded cloth dark blue, tied with a cord. You recognize the color. Your hands do not tremble, not yet. Inside 3 things. A small silver ring bearing a fleur-de-lis, a dried lily, fragile as ash, and a letter. The handwriting is unmistakable. You do not sit to read it. You cannot. You stand beneath the crooked tree that shades your door and let the morning birds bear witness. It begins, "My dearest one," though I never dared to say it. You read it once. Then you fold it carefully. Place it in the pocket inside your vest, the one no one knows is there, and you close your eyes. You do not cry. She would not want that. Instead, you lift your lute and begin to play. Weeks pass. The letter remains unread a second time. You do not need to. The words are etched into you now. Her apologies, shaped like elegies. Her memories, stained with longing and regret. Her confession that even as she wore the crown and led armies and outwitted the most powerful men in Christendom, she still remembered the quiet in your music the only place. She wrote, where she ever felt seen without having to perform. It is the closest thing to a love letter she ever gave you. You think it more than enough. And then, one misty morning, you decide. You pack the lute, now battered at the edges, and a small sack of belongings. You do not tell anyone where you are going, only that you may not be back. The town understands. You have lived long. You have given them beauty. They offer nods, handshakes, small bundles of bread and dried pears. One child slips a flower into your pocket when you aren't looking. You walk south, to Norfolk, to Castle Rising. It takes you weeks. You stop often, not because you are tired, not yet, but because the road deserves to be walked slowly. The rivers look different now than they did when you were a younger man. The trees whisper more. You notice things. A blackbird on a branch, a woman singing to her goats, a broken wall cradled in moss. You sleep under stars, in barns, by the roadside. And you remember the first time she looked at you with something unspoken in her eyes. The night she gave you the parcel and said goodbye without using the word. The evening she prayed aloud while the candle trembled. You remember her voice, her scent, the way she would press her nails into her palm when nervous a habit she never quite broke. And when you reach the edge of Castle Rising, it is dawn. The guards at the outer wall stop you. You offer no name, only the lute. And the letter, unopened again, pressed between your palms. One of the guards reads it, frowns, then disappears into the castle. You are told to wait. So you do. An hour passes, then another, and finally, a man in dark robes emerges. You do not recognize him. He says nothing at first. Then he simply nods. She's gone, he says. 2 days passed. You do not ask how. You do not ask why. Only one question makes it past your lips. Did she say anything? The man tilts his head. She asked that. When the music man came, he'd be allowed to play in her room. He opens the door. You walk in. The room is simple. Stone walls. A narrow bed. One window overlooking the moors, a chair with worn velvet, and a small table, upon which lies a single lily in a cracked vase. You sit, you open your case, you tune the strings, and you play, not the song she always asked for, not at first. You begin with something gentler, a cradle song, a melody from long ago, before kings and crowns and betrayals. Then, without thinking, your fingers shift, and you play her song, slowly, as though each note must be coaxed from silence. It fills the room like incense. You do not stop until the light begins to fade. When you leave the room, no one speaks. They do not need to. They see it in your eyes. You do not return north. You remain nearby, in a quiet house near the coast, where gulls cry over gray waters and the winds carry secrets inland. You play in the chapel sometimes. You teach a few young ones to tune their instruments. And every year, on the anniversary of your visit, you return to the castle. You are given a candle. You are allowed to sit. You play. And though she is gone, you know somewhere beyond the veil of time, of breath, of blood, she listens, and she remembers. The year turns again. Seasons slide over one another like sheets on a long-forgotten bed, soft and quiet, yet persistent. Snow dusts the eaves of your little cottage near the Norfolk coast, melts into rain, and blossoms into another spring. Each transformation is gradual, each moment arriving almost unnoticed until you wake one morning and realize a whole year has passed since you last stood within the cold stone walls of Castle Rising, lute in hand, playing your farewell to a queen who had once, fleetingly, loved you in silence. You are older now, and it shows not only in the mirror, but in the way your fingers stiffen at dawn, in the crackle of your knees when you rise from the chair where you mend broken strings. But more than that, it's in the way time stretches, widens, becomes something you wade through rather than run with. The urgency is gone. There are no more letters to carry, no kings to fool, no corridors to slink through with danger tucked under your sleeve. Only memory. And memory, for all its beauty, is a heavy companion. Each morning you follow the same routine. Stoke the embers, steep the tea, tune the lute. Some days you walk the hills. Others you sit beneath the yew tree behind your house, the same one that bends slightly from the coastal wind. It's crooked now, like you. You lean against it and play not for anyone else, not even for her, but simply because the silence would feel unbearable without sound. You don't play her melody often anymore, not because you've forgotten it. You haven't. Every note lives beneath your skin like a secret that breathes. But you've come to understand something. It was never really your melody. It was hers, and the song deserves silence as much as sound. Still, on certain nights, when the stars hang low like oil lamps, and the wind rustles the tall grass in rhythms that mimic breath, you find your fingers slipping toward it again. The first chord always feels like a question, the second, an answer, and by the third, you've slipped backward not in place, but in time. You are no longer here. You are once more the musician waiting in the Queen's chamber. In town, you're known simply as the minstrel by the cliffs. They know you played in courts, though none quite know which. Some say you performed for Edward III. Others think you were once hired by the French crown. A few claim you were the Queen's favorite, though no one agrees on which queen they mean. You don't clarify. There is a safety in being misremembered. Children come to you sometimes, eager and curious, asking to be shown how to hold the instrument, how to find a chord, how to stretch a note into something that sounds like magic. You teach them with patience. Not all have talent, but that hardly matters. What matters is that they want to listen, that they look at music the way she once did, with hope, with hunger, with the quiet ache of needing something beautiful in a world too full of noise. There's one boy in particular, a boy named Jonah with shaggy curls and a habit of asking questions in sets of 3. He has a knack for rhythm and an ear for tone. But more than that, he has a heart for story. He asks you, once, if you ever loved anyone important. You laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's the wrong way around. No, you say, after a long pause, I loved someone quiet. Letters from the capital are rare, but they do arrive. A merchant you once helped across a border sends word of a coronation. Edward III has taken full control of the throne. His mother, though still alive, remains at Castle Rising, no longer imprisoned, exactly, but not entirely free either. Mortimer is a name no one dares speak aloud, unless they're praising the king's justice for ending his grasp. There is talk of new wars on the horizon. France, Scotland, distant places stirring again with old grudges and fresh ambition. You listen to the reports without feeling the usual pull. Once, such news would have set your blood humming. Now, they feel like stories belonging to someone else's life. You wonder, sometimes, what she thinks of it all. Whether she walks the battlements of that castle and looks toward the horizon, imagining ships returning, banners raised, voices calling her name in reverence once again. Or whether she thinks of none of it. Whether she has, like you, chosen to live in the quiet spaces between memory and regret. One morning in early spring, a girl arrives at your cottage. She cannot be more than 16. Cloaked, hood drawn, riding a horse too fine for her age. She dismounts awkwardly, as if not used to travel, and approaches your door with hesitation. You open it before she knocks. "You're him," she says. You nod. "She told me where to find you," she adds, and you do not ask who she means. You already know. The girl carries a box, wooden, carved, its lid inlaid with lapis and a thin line of silver. She holds it out to you. She said you would understand. You take the box. It's lighter than it looks. She mounts again and rides off before you can speak. You don't call after her. You bring the box inside, set it on the table, and stare at it for a long while. The carvings are familiar. A rose, thorns curling like script, a crown resting on a pillow, and a single lily positioned delicately in the corner, nearly hidden. You open it. Inside a folded cloth, deep blue, the same shade as the Queen's favorite gown. Beneath it, sheet music, aged but carefully preserved, written in your hand. But it is not the song you thought. It is another, the one you played when you first met her, in the corridor outside the great hall, before she spoke your name for the first time. You had forgotten writing it down. She hadn't. At the bottom of the page, in ink faded by time, are 3 words in her handwriting. Still listening, always. You close the box gently. You do not cry. You light a candle. And you play. Years pass. You grow slower, but never still. Your music fades from the streets, but deepens in the soul. You play less often now, choosing your moments with care. A wedding, a birth, a child's first instrument, a funeral. These are your stages now, not courts, not halls, but the ordinary moments where life thins enough for music to slip through. And on the anniversary of her passing, you return to Castle Rising one final time. They let you in without question. Some of the guards remember you. Others have heard of you only in stories. The room is just as you left it. Stone. Simple. Soft with the hush of time. The vase is gone, but the dust where it stood remains. You sit. You tune. And you begin to play the song she left behind. This time, you do not stop. You play until your hands tremble, until your voice fails, until the stars pierce through the window like silent sentinels. You play until your body is spent and your breath too shallow to carry another note. You play, not because she asked, not because the court listens, but because she is still listening. And that, you finally understand, is enough. The next morning, they find you beneath the tree behind your house. Your lute lies beside you. Your fingers rest gently on the strings, still curved, as though finishing a final chord. You are not cold. You are not stiff. You are simply still. On your lap lies a letter, folded, not addressed, not sealed. Just one line, written in careful script. I remembered. They bury you near the chapel where you used to teach the children to sing. The villagers come with flowers, not lilies, they know better. Wild violets, wood anemones, strands of rosemary for memory. Someone places a smooth stone etched with a single note. Your melody carved not in Latin or French or English, but in the language of sound. No great nobles attend. No royal decree marks your passing. No statue rises. Only music. Only silence. Only the echo of a life lived quietly, fully, with both sorrow and love, and a queen's memory pressed like a seal into every note. After your death, the wind continues its slow passage across the Norfolk cliffs. The sea does not notice the absence of your melody, nor do the gulls shift in their flight. The sun still rises over the same gray horizon, and the chapel bell still tolls each morning. Life, as it always does, moves forward quietly, stubbornly, without ceremony. But not all forget. In the months after your passing, a strange thing begins to happen in the town. Children hum tunes no one taught them. The old widow on the corner begins to bake her bread to the rhythm of your softer waltzes. The blacksmith, who never cared for music, finds himself pausing at midday to listen to the echo of strings that are no longer played. The melody you carried through your life once barely noticed, once whispered only into the spaces between torchlight and breath, lingers in corners now. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. People begin to speak of you again, not as the court musician, not as a man who once traveled through kingdoms and carried the secrets of queens, but as a kindness, a stillness, a warm tone in a cold room. They say you taught them to listen. They say you once loved a queen. And when someone asks whether that could be true, the answer is always the same. He never said. But no one denies it. No one laughs. Because somewhere in the space between your final note and the silence that followed, they all felt something impossible to explain. In Castle Rising, a servant girl scrubs the flagstones of the West Tower. She's only been working there a few weeks. Sent by her aunt from Cambridge after a sickness took her mother. She does not know the castle's history, only its drafty rooms and the sting of soap in her hands. And yet, one afternoon, as she walks past the Queen's old chamber, she stops. She hears music, faint, wandering, a single, aching note, drawn from air like a ghost remembering how to breathe. She opens the door. There's no one inside, just light and stillness, and something else, a kind of presence. Not frightening, but not quite empty either. On the mantel rests a single lily, freshly placed, though no one claims to have entered. The girl says nothing of it, but that night, she hums herself to sleep, not realizing she has picked up the same tune you played the last time you stood in that room, far away, in Westminster. The king holds court. Edward III now rules as an unquestioned sovereign, war-tested, revered, and secure. His mother remains at Castle Rising, kept in luxury but far from influence. He rarely speaks of her. Fewer still mention Mortimer. His reign is not built on their names, but over them. And yet, on certain days, he walks alone through the royal gardens and pauses near the linden trees where once, long ago, a musician played a melody so softly the birds themselves seemed to hush. He was only a boy then, 14, caught between the collapse of one father and the rise of another. He remembers the queen standing tall, not afraid to command, not afraid to love, but also not afraid to leave the things she loved behind. He wonders, sometimes, if that musician ever knew how close he had stood to the fire, whether he burned or simply kept playing. He never asked his mother. He never will. In Rouen, an aging monk sorts through a box of old papers and finds a parchment sealed with wax that no longer holds form. Curious, he breaks it, unrolls the brittle document, and sees only a short line of notation musical, handwritten, imperfect. No name, no explanation. He plays it on the chapel organ that night. The tune is simple, but it stays with him. He adds it to the liturgy. A year later, it becomes a hymn. No one knows its origin, but it spreads. South to Poitiers, east to Bruges, across the sea to Bristol and York. In each place, it changes slightly. A measure added here, a word misheard and made sacred, but the soul of the melody endures, always haunting, always gentle, always just out of reach like something once known, now almost remembered. You never intended to write a hymn. You only meant to say goodbye. Jonah, the boy you once taught, now grown, stands before a class of apprentices in a new hall built by the sea. He speaks not of technique, but of listening, not of fame, but of feeling. He holds your old lute, restrung and burnished, and plays your melody without flourish. They ask him, afterward, who wrote the song. He smiles and says, no one famous. They press for more. He adds, it was written by someone who loved a queen, but only once, and only in the shadows. They think it's a story, a legend. He doesn't correct them. He never does. But when he leaves the hall and walks along the surf, he hums the melody to himself, and the wind hums it back. You are not a statue in a garden. You are not named in chronicles, nor painted in the margin of illuminated texts. No poet has immortalized your deeds. No noble line traces itself to your blood. And yet, you are remembered. You are remembered in a song that mothers sing to children on nights when thunder frightens them from sleep. You are remembered in the fingers of a girl learning her first chord beneath the worn beams of a chapel. You are remembered in the hush that falls when a stranger plays in a tavern, and the room seems, for a moment, to breathe as one. You are remembered each time someone chooses beauty over bitterness, silence over spectacle, loyalty over safety. You are remembered not because you were loud, but because you were quiet, and in being quiet, you taught others how to hear. And somewhere perhaps beyond the reach of stars, or just beyond the turn of memory, a woman sits beside a window in a castle that no longer stands. She wears no crown. Her hands are lined, but steady. She holds no scepter, no scroll, no torch, only a lily, only a letter, only a song. And when she closes her eyes, she sees you beneath the tapestry, waiting, watching, playing the melody you wrote for no one else. She smiles, and she listens, still, always, The years after your death are not marked by wars or royal decrees, but by gentler things that move beneath the surface of recorded history like a current, untraceable but ever present. You were never meant to be remembered by kings. Your name does not appear on ledgers or within the hallowed ledges of the cathedral crypts. But you are not forgotten. You are carried forward in 100 quiet ways, in a string of notes played in a village far from the capital, by a boy who never knew your face but knows your melody by heart, in a prayer murmured by an aging widow who heard your song once in passing and has never been able to hum anything else while kneading her bread, in the margins of a traveling minstrel's notebook where your tune transposed, misspelled, misunderstood is scratched beside the words played in Norfolk, made 2 old women cry. It would have amused you, or perhaps not amused. Perhaps it would have broken you a little, that your song, the one you gave to her in the hours before betrayal, now lives without her name. That what was once a secret between you and a queen has now become something shared between strangers, across tables, over hearths. But it's not wrong, because what you shared with her was never meant to belong to time. It was never meant to belong to power, or lineage, or any of the crumbling structures that men call legacy. It belonged to music, and music, like love, lives not in what is preserved, but in what is carried. And so it carries. The abbey near your cottage builds a new hall. It is modest timber and stone, a gift from a merchant whose son was healed by the prayers of a nun who used your melody as a lullaby. They name it St. Margaret's Hall, not in honor of the Queen, not even in honor of you, but the patroness of silence, of endurance, of unspoken strength. Still, the monks call it the music hall. They bring in children from nearby towns to learn letters, arithmetic, and always music. And the first thing every child is taught, your song. They are not told who wrote it. They are only told to listen, to learn, to feel. When a child asks, who is it? For the answer is always the same, for someone who loved someone he could never name. Across the sea, in Avignon, where the papacy now resides in grandeur and rot, a scribe transcribes a strange, haunting tune sent from England. It bears no author, no sigil, just a faint fleur-de-lis inked in the corner, faded almost to invisibility. He copies it onto a vellum scroll alongside sacred works oddly. It fits there. The harmony bends towards sorrow, but never sinks to despair. There's something devout in it, as if it was written not for church, but for the still moment after prayer, when the world feels suspended. He writes beneath it, anonymous, a lament for a queen. He does not know how close he's come. Jonah, the boy who once sat on your lap and pointed at the frets with jam-covered fingers, has grown into a man of care and quiet pride. He lives not far from your cottage, which he keeps as it was. He sweeps the hearth. He tends the crooked yew tree. He oils the lute you left behind, though he rarely plays it. That one, he says, is not for crowds. He teaches music now, not in great halls, but in kitchens, in gardens, in the soft light of places too humble for kings. And always, he teaches your melody. He never calls it yours, never claims it. But on one particular autumn day, a young girl with dark hair and quick fingers asks why that song makes her feel like crying, even when she's happy. He tells her, because someone once played it for someone else, and neither of them were allowed to say what it meant. The girl is quiet for a long time. Then she asks, But they knew. Right. Even if they didn't say it. Jonah only nods. Because he knows. Because you knew. Because she knew too. The queen remains at Castle Rising until the end. Her confinement, if one can call it that, softens over the years. Visitors come. Couriers arrive with news. Servants are attentive, respectful. She is permitted to walk the gardens, to attend chapel, to write, but she is never asked to advise, never summoned to court. She is in the eyes of the realm, retired. She writes letters, some to her son, some to friends, some to foreign courts who still call her La Belle Reine, oubliée, the beautiful, forgotten queen. But there is one letter she never sends. The one addressed to you? It is kept in a small wooden box, locked and sealed, tucked beneath a loose stone in the floor of her bedchamber. She reads it once each year, on the anniversary of your death. She does not cry. She has forgotten how. But she places a lily on the mantel, and in the hours after midnight, when sleep won't come, she whispers your melody to herself. The notes falter. Her voice has aged, but the music lives, and the music listens. Her son visits her once in her final years. They speak of state matters. He asks if she regrets Mortimer. She replies, I regret that I had to need him. He asks if she regrets Edward. She says nothing. He does not ask about you. But when he leaves, he finds a folded sheet of parchment beneath his traveling cloak. It contains your melody. Nothing else. No words, no names. He keeps it. He has it played at her funeral. You are buried far from her, and yet in ways no map can capture. You are side by side. Where she lies, they place a crown carved in stone. Where you lie, they plant violets, and every spring, when the winds shift east and the tide pulls cold air from the continent, the violets bloom in tandem with the roses near her chapel window. No one makes the connection. No one except the old woman who tends both. She hums your song as she works. She doesn't know why. She just knows it feels right. And the melody spreads. It finds its way into ballads sung by girls in white during midsummer dances. It is carved into the lintel of a chapel destroyed by fire, the only thing that survives. It is used as a marching cadence by a captain who says it steadies his men when their courage falters. It becomes the opening hymn of a monastery rebuilt after plague. It is whispered in lullabies. It is murmured before weddings. It is played during funerals, though no one can remember how they learned it. It moves without needing permission. It lives without requiring explanation. And in this way, your life continues, not in books, but in breath. Many years later, when the kingdom of England has changed beyond recognition, when the Plantagenets have long given way to new houses, when battles have shifted to distant lands, and memory has reshaped the past into legend, a scholar uncovers a fragment of parchment in an archive. It is yellowed, fragile, half consumed by time. It contains the beginning of your melody, and a single line scribbled in Latin. For the queen who knew my silence. He is intrigued. He tries to find your name. He does not succeed, but he publishes it anyway. He calls it the Anonymous Lament. It becomes briefly fashionable among the courtly poets to speculate on its origin. Some say it was written by a monk for a lost abbess. Others claim it is part of a forgotten Arthurian romance. A few more romantic still say it was the final love letter of a musician to a queen who gave up her crown for nothing more than a memory. None of them are right, but all of them are close. And in the end, that is what matters. Not the precision of your story, not the retention of your name, but the way your music moved through shadows, through silence, through the spaces where words could not go. You were never meant to be a figure in history. You were never meant to wear laurels or command armies. You were meant to listen, to carry, to witness, and to love, even when that love had no place to live, even when it could never be spoken, even when the only proof of its existence was the soft breath between notes, the echo of fingers plucking strings in the cold air of a fading world. Time, as it always does, reshapes the truth. It smooths edges, flattens contradictions, and polishes the past until even the most jagged truths seem to fit neatly into the stories people want to believe. And yet, there are some stories that resist the hands of time, softly, stubbornly. They do not cry out for recognition. They do not demand monuments or crowns. But they endure all the same, whispered in corners, folded into song, tucked into the tender silence between what is said and what is meant. Yours is one of those stories. It moves not through parchment or decree, but through music across rivers and through doors left slightly ajar, into the ears of those who have never heard your name and never will, and yet who somehow feel what you once felt, what she once felt, what you both dared, for a moment, to become. There is a house in Sussex where an old harp hangs above a hearth, its strings long since broken. The man who owns it says his grandmother used to play it, that she claimed it was fashioned in the court of Queen Isabella, though no one quite believes it. The wood is simple, the carvings faint, and yet, every spring, a small group gathers in that house to sing. They do not sing hymns. They sing your melody. Some of them don't even know where they learned it. One woman insists her great-aunt hummed it in the final weeks of her life, as though it were a secret only the dying could remember. Another says she heard it once, played by a blind fiddler on a foggy morning in Norfolk. No one argues. No one needs to. The melody belongs to all of them now, and yet to no one. It is the inheritance of those who have loved in silence. In the north, near York, Jonah has grown into the kind of man people trust without needing to understand why. His hair is silver now, his voice quieter, but still certain. His hands, once so quick on the frets, are slower, but they have not forgotten. He still plays, though not for crowds anymore. Only for those who ask gently, or those who seem in need of something they cannot name. He is taken to walking alone by the river each evening. The villagers watch him from their windows, always with the same expression respect mixed with something softer, reverence, perhaps, or memory. He has become the last living link to something no one can quite explain. One night, he finds a child sitting on the riverbank, a girl of 9, perhaps 10. She does not flinch when he approaches. She does not speak. She simply hums. The tune is unmistakable. He sits beside her. "Who taught you that?" he asks. She shrugs. "No one. I just know it." He looks at her for a long time. "You must have heard it somewhere." She frowns, as though the question is too simple. "It's always been there." Jonah smiles, not because he understands, but because she does. And that is enough. Further south, in London, a scholar prepares an anthology of medieval melodies to be published for the King's Chapel. He collects works from abbeys, cathedrals, and private collections. One day, among a pile of brittle scrolls purchased from a dissolved priory, he finds a fragment, a melody with no name, followed by a single line in Middle French. pour celle qui m'écoutait quand nul ne le faisait. For she who listened when no one else did. It does not take him long to recognize the tune. He's heard it before in gardens, in alleys, in the quiet spaces between formal compositions, always faint, always moving. He writes to a colleague in Paris, I believe I have found the origin of the anonymous lament. He begins, and for the next 4 pages, he speculates wildly, inaccurately, and with passion. He proposes the piece was written by a disillusioned priest, or perhaps a courtier rejected by the queen herself. He even wonders aloud whether it was Mortimer's secret love confession to Isabella, disguised as music. Nowhere does he imagine the truth, that it was written by a court musician who loved a woman he could never claim, that it was played not for glory, but for goodbye, that it was meant not to echo through history, but to live in one heart, just one, and disappear with her final breath. The truth, as ever, remains in the shadows. In a convent near Canterbury, a sister rises early each morning to tend the herb garden. Her back aches, her fingers are stiff, but as she works, she hums. Her song has no words, only melody. A new novice hears her one morning. What is that tune, she asks. The sister smiles. We don't know. She replies, but we think it once made a queen weep. The novice falls silent. Then, softly, she begins to hum it too. Generations pass. The world changes. Castles crumble. Thrones are lost and found. Names are rewritten. But your melody endures. It changes, yes, bent by the hands that play it, stretched by the tongues that sing it, but it remains unmistakable, like a face glimpsed in a crowd that you're sure you knew once, in a dream you can't quite place. It is played during the coronation of a queen who does not believe in ghosts, but weeps all the same when she hears it. It is sung by a soldier in a trench who claims it came to him in a dream. It is etched into the underside of a piano built in Vienna, found decades later by a composer who says the wood hums when touched. It is everywhere. It is nowhere. And you are in all of it. But the world does not pause. And in the great halls of memory, there are always new shadows, always new stories whispering beneath the noise. Most will be forgotten. Some will burn bright before vanishing. A rare few will linger. Yours lingers, not because it was loud, but because it was true. And truth, once sung, has a way of finding its way back. On the edge of the sea, where the cliffs fall away into mist, there is a place where the wind carries strange sounds. Fishermen say they've heard music in the early hours before dawn, drifting across the waves, a tune they cannot name, one that makes them pause, just for a moment, before hauling in their nets. They do not know that you once walked this coast. They do not know that she once waited here for news. They only know that the song sounds like longing, and that it makes the silence feel less empty. And what of her? What of the woman who once summoned you from a tapestry-shadowed hallway to play a melody she would carry until her last breath? She lies beneath the earth now, in a stone vault few visit, her name carved in Latin, her dates remembered in books, her deeds debated in universities and dramatized in theaters. Some call her a heroine. Some call her a traitor. Some say she was a pawn, others a queen in her own right. No one agrees. Perhaps that is fair. She lived between definitions. But you remember her not as they do. You remember her sitting on a cushion near the fire, listening as you played the song that made her mouth tremble, though she never spoke a word. You remember her asking, quietly, if God listens to queens, and you remember what you didn't say, that you were never sure about God, but you were certain he listened to that song, because you did, and you never stopped. In the end, that is all that remains. A song, a silence, a story passed from hand to hand, never fully told, never fully known, yet always understood by those who need it most. You were the court musician no one named in the histories. You were the lover no one suspected. You were the witness to a moment that turned the wheel of kingdoms, and the author of a melody that turned hearts long after yours had stopped. You did not write your name in stone. You wrote it in song. And now, centuries later, the song still plays. Softly. Everywhere. The rain has returned to Norfolk. Not the fierce kind that beats against shutters and floods the roads, but the soft, patient drizzle that soaks through wool and memory alike. It is the sort of rain that silences birds, that softens the edges of stone walls, that makes the world feel older than it is. A coastal rain, coming off the gray sea, with breath cold enough to make old wounds ache, and old stories stir beneath their coverings. It is this rain that falls, year after year, on the moss-covered grave where your name does not appear. There is a marker. Yes, simple in wood, long since worn smooth by time and weather. The carving has faded. Even the townsfolk who once tended to your plot have moved on, died, or forgotten. Only Jonah still remembers the exact turn of the path where you lie, beneath the shadow of the yew tree that leans like an old friend bowing in mourning. And even Jonah, now frail and winded, comes less often. Still, when he does come, he brings lilies. Always lilies. Not roses, not violets, not laurels, just the flower she chose, the one you never questioned, never asked about, because something in her silence made you understand lilies were for endings and beginnings, and for all the words that lovers cannot speak aloud. The locals do not understand why the old man leaves them on a grave with no name, but none of them remove them either. They simply note the quiet and the music that sometimes drifts down the path from no visible source. They hear it in their sleep. Some say a tune without origin, as though it belongs not to a person but to the land itself. They're not wrong, because you are the land now. You are the rain, the stone, the note that lingers long after the song has ended, far from Norfolk. In the court of the new queen, a young woman descended, not by blood from Isabella, but by power. There is a portrait that hangs near the royal music room. It's not labeled. No name, no date, no inscription. Only a man with a lute in his lap. His eyes turned not toward the viewer, but slightly upward, as if listening for a sound beyond the world's edge. No one knows where the painting came from. It was found in an estate outside York, tucked behind a rotting tapestry. The artist is unknown. The colors have faded, but the emotion in the subject's face is unmistakable. Sorrowful, yes, but gentle, accepting, hopeful, in a way that defies explanation. Children, when brought through the room for their early lessons in history and etiquette, always pause at the painting. They ask, was he real? Their tutors say, perhaps, and then they move on. But one girl, sharp-eyed, bookish, with a gift for the harp, sits before the portrait one day, refusing to leave even after the bells call her to supper. She whispers something into the empty air, and if one were close enough to hear, they'd catch the words. Thank you. In the archives beneath Oxford's Bodleian Library, a young historian stumbles across a box misfiled under theological fragments, unattributed. Inside a crumbling folio of vellum, and a letter pressed between the pages. The melody is familiar. She has heard it before once, on a trip to a village church in the east, where an elderly choirmaster taught his pupils a strange tune passed down orally through generations. It had no name then, either. The historian examines the notation, the ancient ink, the language. She knows the melody's structure is unusual for the time. There are flourishes, modulations in the minor key, a repeating phrase with irregular rhythm, too personal for ecclesiastical chant, too emotional for courtly ceremony. And then she reads the letter. It is unsigned, torn, only half legible. But she pieces together this much. I played it once more, as she watched the firelight flicker, not for an audience, not for applause, just for her. She said nothing, but I think she heard everything I could not say. The historian exhales. She begins her thesis that year. It is called Songs in the Shadows, the anonymous voice of early medieval court musicians. Her professors smile politely. They expect it will be dry, technical, a niche exploration. They do not expect to weep while reading it, but they do. At the ruins of Castle Rising, now a heritage site with posted placards and gift shop maps, tourists wander through the empty halls, pausing to take photos beside crumbling staircases and moss-ridden stones. Most are here for the architecture, the history, the echoes of names more famous than yours. But not all. One young woman, American, backpacking, curious, wanders off the tour path and finds herself standing in a small chamber, marked only the Queen's Room. It's quiet here, removed. The stone walls seem to carry their own breath. A draft moves through, unsettling her hair, though no window is open. She sits on a bench, closes her eyes, and begins to hum, not because she means to, but because the room feels like it's waiting for music. The tune forms without effort, flowing from her lips as though it had always been there. She doesn't know it. She's never heard it before. But when she opens her eyes again, her cheeks are wet. She will later write in her journal, there was something in that room, something sad, something beautiful, like someone loved there once and never got to say so. She doesn't know it, but she's right. The melody remains unclaimed. There have been ambitious attempts by scholars, composers, romantics to assign it to a name, to you. But no one can find the proof they need. Too many manuscripts lost, too many songs altered by time and memory. And besides, you never signed your music. You weren't trying to be remembered. You were only trying to be heard. And in that, you succeeded beyond even your own imagining. You have become a part of something larger. Not a story, but a feeling. Not a man, but a melody. A thread running quietly through centuries, binding people who will never meet, who will never know your name, but who will feel something when the first note is played and their breath catches, just for a moment, just before they remember that they too have loved someone who couldn't stay. In a lighthouse on a distant coast, a keeper keeps a journal, not of ships or storms or repairs, but of songs. He writes, heard it again last night just before dawn. Came through the fog like a whisper. Same tune. Third time this month. Don't know where it comes from. Doesn't feel like the wind. Feels older. He doesn't play an instrument. He's never been to court. But he hums the melody each time he climbs the stairs. Because it makes the silence bearable. Because it makes him feel like someone is still listening. And what would you say if you could see it all? The girl before the painting? The novice in the garden? The child by the river? The student in the archives? The woman in the Queen's chamber, humming your goodbye? What would you feel, knowing your song, your final offering to a woman who was never truly yours, has become the unspoken hymn of 100,000 strangers? Would it comfort you? Would it hurt? Or would you only smile that same soft smile you wore the night she asked you to play for her one last time, knowing the music would outlast everything else, even you, especially you? She once said she needed one thing that night to be beautiful, and it still is. Every time your melody finds its way into the hands of someone who never knew why they were playing it, something beautiful happens again, because your song was never about you. It was never about her. It was about what love sounds like when it has no name. In the deep folds of history, the loudest voices are often crowned and canonized, preserved in the ink of chroniclers who served lords, not truth. Battles are remembered in numbers, kings in bloodlines, and queens in treaties. But some stories move differently. They slip through the cracks, like candle smoke through keyholes. They are carried not by power, but by something far quieter, by memory that resists being forgotten, and by music that refuses to be silenced. Your story, though no one names it as such, lives still. In the corners of old monasteries where the dust is thick and the ink has turned brown, your melody can still be found, often scratched into the margins of psalters. Sometimes without notes, just lyrics, fragmentary and trembling, as if someone tried to remember and failed, as if they heard it once in a dream and wrote it down before it vanished. One such psalter was found not long ago, buried under a pile of fire-damaged books from a long-abandoned priory in Cornwall. The archivist cataloging the fragments found a page with faded lines that read, "He sang for no court, and bowed for no crown. He played for the Queen when the torches burned down." And beneath that, scrawled in a different hand, almost a whisper, "The strings have snapped, but the song remains." They didn't know what it meant, but they kept it. They couldn't explain why. There's an inn along the northern coast where storms roll in so heavy that the wind rattles the glass even when it's double-paned. The locals drink there in winter, huddled near the hearth, telling stories and half-truths between long silences and longer pints. One of those stories, always told late, goes like this. There once was a man who played for a queen. Not in the bright chambers of glory, but in the moments before everything ended. A song she asked for, knowing it was goodbye. A song he gave, knowing he would lose her. They say that when the sea is calm, you can hear the song drift over the cliffs like mist. Of course, they laugh after, shrug, blame the drink. But the barkeep always goes quiet, because his mother once told him that when she was a girl and her grandfather was dying, he asked to hear the song with no name, and when she began to sing what she remembered of it, the old man smiled, then closed his eyes, then never opened them again. Not all memories are oral. Not all songs are sung. In a small cottage, long since emptied and overgrown, the walls still hold your echo, literally under layers of whitewash and plaster, behind shelves warped by time. There's a line carved into the stone in a hand that tried to be neat, but wavered with age. Someone, perhaps Jonah, perhaps someone else entirely, scratched your melody in notation a few measures only, the beginning of the tune, like an unfinished thought left behind for someone who might someday understand. The current owners never notice. But once, a boy visiting from London, bored by the countryside, begins tapping his fingers idly along the window ledge while his parents talk about renovations. And somehow, though, no one taught him he taps the rhythm perfectly. You are not immortal, not truly. Your face is gone. Your voice is gone. Your hands. Your eyes. The shape of your mouth when you looked at her across the fire. All of it lost. But what you felt, that remains. Because there is something strange about truth told through music. It survives in ways the body cannot. It weaves itself into the world's breath. It cannot be banned, or beheaded, or buried. It simply waits. For a hallway to echo just right. For a child to hum without knowing why. For a queen, or a stranger, or a lone musician in a snow-covered village to feel something stir in them they cannot name. When that happens, you are there. Not as a man, but as a feeling. Not as a name, but as the space between two notes. And still she lingers too. Isabella of France, daughter of a king, wife of a king, mother of a king, called the she-wolf by those who feared her, called traitor and savior, seductress and saint. Every generation has a new name for her, a new judgment. None of them are complete. But she is not a legend to you. She is the woman who once leaned against you, not in passion, but in exhaustion, when she thought no one was watching. She is the voice that asked you to stay in a corridor of whispers and treason. She is the silence that followed your last note. Did she love you? They ask, centuries later, in lectures and books and speculative plays. Some say she used you. Others say she spared you. But you knew that she could not love the way others did, that her love was bound in parchment and duty and impossible choices. And still, she gave you that moment, that one song, that one night. And for some loves, that is enough. A composer in the 21st century stumbles upon a strange folk melody while researching medieval English ballads. It has no official title, no clear attribution, and yet appears like a weed in spring in dozens of unrelated sources, each slightly different but unmistakably connected. Intrigued, he weaves it into a new orchestral piece. He titles it No Crown, No Grave. It premieres in a small theater to polite applause. And yet, after the performance, a woman from the audience approaches him, tears in her eyes. "I don't know why," she says, "but that felt like goodbye." He smiles, because he doesn't know why either. But he felt it too, somewhere, in a stone chapel no longer used for worship. A child kneels before an altar and whispers a prayer, not because she was told to, but because something about the room makes her feel small in a sacred way. She is not praying to a God she understands. She is not reciting words from a book. She is just speaking from her heart. And without meaning to, as she finishes, she hums a melody. You know which one. Your story has become a map without borders, not one to be followed, but to be felt. It leads nowhere in particular, and everywhere at once. It does not end with death, nor with loss, nor even with memory. It ends only when the song stops being sung. But it hasn't, and it won't. Not yet. Not while there are still lovers who sit in silence beside each other, hearing the words neither of them can speak. Not while there are still musicians who play not for fame, but because something inside them needs to say something that cannot be said. Not while there are still people who ache and cannot explain why until they hear that tune. Not while there are still strings, still breath, still ears that listen. And so you continue, not as flesh nor ghost, but as the space between things, as the breath that catches when the heart remembers something it never truly forgot, as the pause before the final note, where the soul, for just a moment, believes it might break and doesn't. You are not gone. You are simply playing elsewhere. In a small museum along the Norfolk coast, tucked between the weathered docks and a gray-walled bakery that sells oatcakes dusted with nutmeg, there hangs a display that few visitors linger at. Most come to the museum for the maritime artifacts, the half-rotted hull of a fishing boat, the rusted tools from the Napoleonic blockades, the glass floats tangled in rope that once lined the nets of whalers. The room where your story waits is quiet, dusty, its windows often streaked by the salt rain that sweeps in from the sea. On the wall is a single item, a facsimile of a manuscript page. The original is locked away in an archive in Cambridge, delicate beyond touch, the ink already fading into parchment. The replica, enlarged and flattened beneath glass, shows a few bars of music, just enough to start a tune. Below them, in elegant Gothic script, is a line scholars still debate. Pour celle dont le silence chantait plus que 1000 voix, for she whose silence sang more than 1,000 voices. There is no attribution. The placard beside it reads, Anonymous, early 14th century, possibly connected to the court of Isabella of France. Most visitors read it, nod vaguely, and move on. But now and then, perhaps once every few months, a person will pause. Sometimes a schoolchild, sometimes a pensioner on a seaside holiday, sometimes a tired-looking man with salt on his boots. They will lean in, study the notes, and hum, softly, almost without meaning to, and always the same tune. You've become a part of the land now, of its breath, its hush, and in that museum room, in that glance, that hum, that pause between thought and understanding, you are playing again. Elsewhere in England, in a stone church rarely visited except by the crows nesting in its broken steeple, ivy creeps down the walls like the slow fingers of time. There, on a forgotten plaque near the pulpit, your name or something like it has been nearly erased by lichen and soot. It is not written in grandeur, no heraldry, no epitaph, just 4 words, carved so faintly that they can only be read when the light cuts across them just so. He played, she heard. It is not a confession, nor a claim. It is a truth, one too simple for historians, too soft for poems, but true all the same. The Queen's final years are little discussed in official records. Castle Rising was never a prison in name, and yet it held her with the quiet finality of one. Her letters grew shorter, her visitors fewer, her retinue diminished until only a few loyal attendants remained, mostly women who had known her when her son was still a boy, with 2 large boots and 2 bright eyes. They say she walked the gardens even in the cold, that she wore blue, always, that she read by the window, but seldom turned pages, that on some nights the maids could hear her speaking aloud in French, though no one was in the room. Some claim she went mad, but those who served her longest say no. They say she remembered. They say she waited. You, of course, never returned to court. Not after she sent the last letter. not after the messenger came with lilies and silence. You left that world behind as one leaves a burning house intact in body. Perhaps, but full of smoke and ghosts. Your later years were quiet. Your cottage was small, but it had a hearth, a shelf for tea leaves, and a stool worn smooth from evenings spent tuning the same lute. You did not compose many new songs. Instead, you played the ones already inside you, over and over, as if trying to refine them into their final, truest form. Some nights, you would play her melody backwards, or upside down, or in minor, searching for its heart, or perhaps trying to see if it had changed. It hadn't. It never would, because it wasn't a song anymore. It was a memory, and memories do not evolve. They only return. A traveling monk once stayed with you during a storm. He was old, soft-spoken, with a stammer and a limp. He asked for shelter and, when you gave it, offered a blessing in return. That night, you played for him. He said nothing as you played, but when you finished, he simply whispered, "That is the sound of a soul that never spoke its name." You gave him the last candle you had. He left at dawn. In the library of a university, long after both of you are dust, a student writes a thesis on the musical evolution of love ballads from the 13th century through the early Renaissance. She's meticulous, thorough, obsessed with footnotes. She discovers your melody in 9 sources, each slightly different altered key signatures, transposed refrains, occasional notes added or dropped like stones in a river's path. But each version ends the same way, not with a final chord, but with a silence, a beat left intentionally empty. She becomes fixated on it. She titles her work "A Pause Left Open the Liminal Spaces of Medieval Courtship Music." Her supervisor calls it ambitious. He doesn't know that, 3 nights before submission, she woke in tears and didn't understand why. She'd fallen asleep listening to the only recording she had of the melody played by a young countertenor in a cold stone church. The acoustics rough, the air still. It felt like someone saying goodbye and not meaning it. The song reaches further still. A violinist in Warsaw includes it, unnamed, in a recital of forgotten pieces. A cellist in Boston improvises a harmony to it, recording a version that gains quiet traction among a small circle of film composers. A flutist in Kyoto hears it played on a street corner in Lyon and thinks it must be a lullaby from a village too small to appear on maps. None of them know its origin, but all of them feel something when they play it. And each, in their own way, carries it forward. Jonah dies in spring. He dies quietly, in his sleep, beneath the yew tree where he once tied your lute to keep the strings from swelling in the rain. The townsfolk hold a service in the chapel. They do not know what song to play, but a child no one is sure who steps forward and begins to hum. The others join in. By the end, the whole chapel is singing, not with precision, not in harmony, but with feeling. And that, somehow, is enough. They bury him beside you. No name on his marker either. Just a second line scratched beneath the first. He remembered. Years later, a poet writes a verse about an unnamed man who loved a queen from the shadows. It's romanticized, of course, full of embellishments. The man wears a mask. The queen dies of a broken heart. There's a fire, a duel. Nothing like what truly happened. But in the final stanza, the poet writes, "He did not speak. He did not stay. He left a song. She sang anyway." And something in those lines feels right. Not because they're accurate, but because they carry your truth better than any footnote could. You are gone now, But your silence is not. It plays on. Not loudly, not always clearly, but constantly. In music. In breath. In the moment when someone almost says I love you and doesn't. In the pause before a kiss that doesn't come. In the echo of shoes on stone when a queen walks away from a firelit room, never turning back. That is where you are. Still. Always. There is a graveyard beside a crumbling church on a hillside in Norfolk, long overgrown and half forgotten, where brambles climb freely across ancient stones and ivy loops around leaning crosses like threads of green lace. No one tends it regularly. It is too far from town, too close to the marshes, and the road is more mud than cobblestone. But still, a few come. Not many. Not often. Just enough that the gate's latch remains free of rust. Just enough that the path is never completely lost beneath the weeds. Here, between two stones worn nearly smooth by centuries of rain and wind, lies a third, flat to the ground. No name, no date, only music. A single bar, carved deeply into the stone, 5 lines, 4 notes. The first measure of your song. Below it, a single line in French, faint but legible. Ceci est ce qu'elle a entendu. This is what she heard. The visitors don't always understand. Some assume it's a hymn. Others think it's a code. One boy believes it's part of an ancient prophecy and insists his grandmother hums the same notes when baking bread. But those who stop long enough, those who kneel, or hum, or pause, seem to leave different than when they arrived. Softer, like someone who's just listened to a secret no one else heard. Not a secret of kings or wars or legacies, but the kind of secret 2 people carry between them, never spoken, never claimed, and never broken. A secret called love. There is a convent in Flanders where the sisters keep no names. Their vows require silence for part of each day, and during those hours they communicate with gestures, glances, and on rare occasion, music. Once a week, they gather in the small chapel with its narrow windows and sing. They don't sing in Latin. They don't sing the Psalms. They sing your melody. They do not know its source. The elder sister, when asked, says only that it came to her in her novitiate years ago, passed from another sister, and from another before her. The melody is simple, she says, but it holds something more than doctrine, something gentler than doctrine. It teaches them, not with words, but with pauses, with breath. It reminds us, she says, that not all things holy are named. And perhaps she's right. You were never canonized. You were never painted in stained glass. But your song has entered more sacred spaces than many saints, because it carries no demands, no laws, no judgments, only a feeling that aches with beauty. A playwright in Prague stages a tragedy set in a medieval court. He titles it The Queen's Shadow. The protagonist is not a queen, nor a king, nor a knight, but a nameless musician who becomes a reluctant witness to the fall of a kingdom. The plot is wrong in many places. Mortimer is made into a sorcerer. Isabella a villain turned victim, but one scene rings strangely true. It is a scene in which the musician, standing before the queen for the final time, is told, "Play for me. I want to hear what you've hidden from me all these years." And when he plays, the court vanishes. The banners fade. The soldiers stop marching. Only she remains, listening. When the curtain falls, the audience is silent. A woman in the 3rd row weeps. A boy in the back hums the melody under his breath, not knowing why. The critic writes a curious piece, historically flawed, emotionally flawless, and he gives it 5 stars. In a bookshop in Seville, a tourist opens an old anthology of European poetry. The pages are thin and gold-edged, the ink nearly vanished. On page 112, she finds a poem titled "The Lute Without a Master." She reads it aloud to herself. He held no sword, no scroll, no seal, but she turned to him when others fled. She asked not for vows, nor hands, nor steel, only a song before the dread. He gave it whole, without defense. She left him with no recompense, and still he played beneath the stars, for what was once and what still is. She buys the book, carries it across oceans. Later, on a lonely night, she reads that stanza aloud again, and hears a note in her mind, one she never learned, but has always known. The king's records, kept in Westminster and guarded by centuries of dust and pride, contain no mention of you, no writ, no reward, no punishment. In this version of the world, you never existed. You are neither friend nor enemy, neither hero nor traitor. You were not judged. You were simply omitted, and perhaps that is fitting, because while they wrote of war, you played through it. While they chased titles, you chased silence. While they built legacies in ink, you offered yours in sound. And though the ink has faded, the sound remains. In an academy in Vienna, a student writes a symphonic interpretation of your melody. She calls it "For the Unnamed." The first movement is chaotic, full of sharp dissonances and clashing rhythms. The second is softer, slower, like a conversation in shadows. The third is a single note, held impossibly long, stretching across silence. Critics don't know what to make of it. One calls it an echo without origin. Another calls it the sound of something already lost. They aren't wrong. They just haven't read your story. On the anniversary of her death, Isabella's an elderly woman stands at the gates of Castle Rising. She is not a historian, not a relative, not a reenactor. She is simply drawn there, as though by something unfinished. She lays down lilies. She sits in the grass for an hour. She says nothing. But before she leaves, she hums, just once, a tune that no one else hears. What does it mean to be remembered? Is it to be written, praised, painted, or is it something quieter, to be carried in a tune, to be passed from hand to hand like a cup of warmth, to live in a melody someone hums when they don't even know they're humming? You are remembered that way, and more than remembered, you are still being heard. Your final gift was not the song itself. It was not the kiss never kissed, or the letter never sent, or the words never spoken. It was the space you left, the silence between your notes, the stillness between your last bow and her last breath. That space has become sacred. That space has become music. Centuries after your last breath dissolved into the Norfolk wind, a violinist stands beneath the vaulted ceiling of York Minster, her bow poised above the strings, her heart thudding not from fear but from reverence. The cathedral is cold, its stones steeped in echoes and incense, and the pews are mostly empty. But the concert is not for a crowd. It is part of a series titled Whispers of the Unrecorded, a tribute to those whose names never made it into ledgers, but whose acts still shaped the world. She has chosen your song. She does not call it that, of course. To her, and to her audience, it is merely the lament for an unnamed queen. That's what the archivists labeled it when it was recovered from the tangled folios of an East Anglian monastic ruin. The true name, if it ever had one, was lost long ago. But the music remains. And so she plays. The first notes rise like breath in winter. The melody blooms slowly, drawn from her strings with a tenderness that hushes even the old pipes creaking high in the clear story. The song is not sorrowful in the way most laments are. It does not wail. It does not beg. It does not plead. It remembers. It listens. It lets its grief settle gently, like dust on the shoulders of a lover who once sat waiting by the fire. The violinist does not know your story. She does not know of the corridor tapestries, or the queen's hushed voice, or the way your fingers trembled as you played her song for the last time. She doesn't know of Mortimer, or Windsor, or the cold wind off the channel when you smuggled the letter inside your lute case, but she feels it, not as history, but as ache. And so, when she finishes, and the cathedral holds its breath a moment longer than it needs to, she bows not to applause, but to memory. Someone in the back wipes their eyes, and the minster, its stones older than most kingdoms, absorbs the silence like communion. In a modern London music school, a young composer restless, with ink on his sleeves and a hunger to write something that matters, stumbles across a fragment in an online archive, a medieval melody, traced back to multiple sources, each claiming it as part of their regional heritage. He plays it once on the keyboard, then again. He doesn't know why, but something about the intervals lingers. The way the third phrase repeats but never resolves, the echo of something unsaid. He rearranges it, layers it, adds harmonies, subtracts them, then finally strips it back to what it was. Just a voice, just the truth of a single soul, offered without demand. He renames it for the one who stayed. He tells no one what it means. But when he debuts it at a student recital, the room grows still. Even the professor, who rarely stays for student work, remains seated until the final echo fades. The next morning, 4 students message him asking for the sheet music. None of them say why. A historian careful, skeptical, allergic to romance reads a mention in a footnote of a melody linked to Queen Isabella. It's in a legal manuscript, of all things, from the early 15th century, used as a metaphor in a land dispute. He plays the note of the silent minstrel. It reads, "Whose tune turned queens against kings." The phrase sticks. He doesn't believe it. Of course, symbolic language, poetic license, but the footnote bothers him, so he digs. He finds references in old French collections of ballads, in Scottish folk songs, in the archives of a convent in Belgium. The same melodic pattern, the same peculiar phrase endings, over and over, surviving like a stubborn vine through history's rubble. He begins to wonder, not aloud at first, but quietly, in private notes. Who was the silent minstrel? What did he witness? What did he give up? And why did his song outlive kings? He writes a paper not for publication, just for himself. A speculative essay titled "The One She Asked to Stay Echoes of an Unnamed Musician in the Court of Isabella of France." He leaves it unfinished, because the truth, he realizes, cannot be proved, only felt in a dream. You stand again in the corridor at Windsor, your lute strung and ready, the air thick with the scent of iron and jasmine. The queen is there young again, or maybe simply timeless. Her crown is absent, her veil undone, her eyes unreadable. She does not speak. She doesn't need to. You begin to play, and though your hands are not what they once were, though they belong now to a body long dust, you find the strings obey as they always did. Each note glides into the next, and as the melody unfolds, the corridor begins to change. The walls dissolve into trees. The torchlight fades into dawn. And before you, no longer a queen, no longer in hiding, no longer carrying the weight of betrayal, she listens. She listens. And when the song ends, she says nothing, but she places her hand to her chest, right where her heartbeat used to thunder when you played, and nods. Then the dream ends, but the silence it leaves behind does not. A filmmaker in Montreal uses your melody in a scene about loss. The story isn't medieval. It's about two women on a bench after one has received bad news. But the director, having heard a cellist perform a variation of your tune at a wedding years ago, can't forget the way it sounded when played without accompaniment. He licenses the melody public domain, no known origin. And in the final scene, as one woman leaves the other behind and walks alone through falling snow, the music plays. No lyrics, no words, only the song. A reviewer writes, "The moment says more in music than the script does in 2 hours." And he's right, because what you wrote was never meant to explain, only to witness, only to accompany, only to remain. In the future years or decades or even centuries hence, a child sits in a classroom that no longer uses paper, no longer teaches history as a chronology of rulers and wars. The child wears something over their ears, and when the teacher activates the music lesson, one of the options offered is unattributed medieval ballads. The child chooses at random. Your song plays. The child says nothing. But later, when walking home, they hum it under their breath. When asked what it is, they shrug. "I don't know," they say. "It just feels like something I've always known." You were never canonized, but you are sacred. You were never crowned, but you are cherished. You were never painted, but you are imagined. And in a world that so often forgets those who lived quietly, your song has remembered you. Not in museums alone, not in lecture halls, but in lives, in strangers, in hearts. A priest lights a candle in a cathedral where your song is sometimes used as a hymn, though no one calls it that. He stands in the candlelight and hums, his voice aged, untrained. He does not know the story. He cannot trace the melody's lineage. He could not name you. But in his humming, there is reverence. And in the flame, you flicker once more. And still she listens. Wherever she has gone, if anywhere she listens, not with ears, not with memory, but with the same part of the soul that once sat across from you beside the fire, eyes wide, listening not to what you played, but to what you meant. Still, she hears it. And still, you play, because this story, like love, has no end. Only a melody with no final note. Only a silence that does not close, but opens. It is late. The halls are quiet. The court has long since vanished into dust and legend. But tonight, you are back in it, not by memory, not by dream, but by the strange, glimmering persistence of something stronger than either longing. You are no longer young, no longer living, no longer even breath, but in this echo, this final stanza of existence, you return to the moment before the song. The corridor stretches ahead, half shadow, half moonlight, The tapestries hang still. The fire in the brazier has gone low, casting a flicker that touches the stone walls like fading parchment. And she stands there, not a queen, not yet, not anymore, not defined by history or title or betrayal. Just her, just the woman who turned her face when you played the second verse, just the woman who pressed her hand to the small of your back when you bowed, as if to say, "Don't go." Just the woman who asked for your music when all else was falling. She is watching you. You do not speak. There is no need. You reach for your instrument, not a lute anymore. Not really, but the idea of one, the symbol of all you carried, all you kept inside when speaking, would have shattered the moment. The notes rise, and now, after all this time, you play it again, not as farewell, not as service, not as disguise or confession, but simply as what it always was beneath everything else. Love, not the kind with poems or promises, not the kind that leads to marriage or memory or names carved into rings, but the kind that walks quietly beside someone in their pain, that listens, even when not invited, that stays in the corner of the room until they are ready to speak, and says, "Only I'm here." The song flows out of you like breath at last released. It is cleaner than it ever was, simpler. You do not reach for grace notes. You do not bend the rhythm into something more impressive. You only play what the truth has always been. A simple tune, offered without expectation, held like a cup of water to trembling lips. Outside the dream, in the world of mud and wheels and modernity, a woman named Eloise rides a train through Yorkshire. She is not a historian, not an artist, not a lover of medieval things. She is tired. Her day has been long. Her headphones are old. Her phone's battery is low. She scrolls past dozens of songs before one begins to play automatically, randomly. She doesn't remember downloading it. She almost skips it, but the first notes stop her. She listens, and something in her chest shifts subtly. Then with weight. It isn't sadness, exactly, nor nostalgia. It's not tied to anything she knows, but it pulls at her, like a hand at her sleeve, like someone whispering. You've heard this before, haven't you? She plays it again, and again, and when the train pulls into her stop, she remains seated a moment longer, eyes closed, letting the final note fade. She does not know you, but she has carried something of you now. You are with her, somewhere in a dusty drawer in an old manor house. A box is opened by a girl searching for costume jewelry. Instead, she finds pages of sheet music, rough, browned, handwritten, a melody she can't read, but whose curve across the page feels oddly familiar. She doesn't know why, but she hums. The house creaks. The dust dances in the window light, and the song is reborn again. In the centuries between your first note and the present moment, you have become many things. To some, you are a rumor, a ghost of the Queen's imagination, a story she made up to comfort herself in exile. To others, you are a cipher, a way to explain a melody too beautiful to be impersonal. To most, you are unknown, but to the melody, you are everything. Because without you, it would not exist. Without your silence, it would not speak. Without your ache, it would not soothe. A man builds a chapel in his garden, not a religious space, but one made of stone and glass and soft benches. It is circular, with no altar, no icon, no liturgy, only a speaker in the center. Each morning, it plays your melody once, just once, and then nothing more. Visitors come. They sit. They leave quietly. Many return. One woman leaves behind a note. It reads, "I thought I was alone in how I loved him. Then I heard this." She does not leave her name, but she does leave a lily. Your story has folded itself so gently into the world that it now moves without resistance. It is no longer tethered to your lifetime. It is no longer even about you and her. Not exactly. It is about all who have held love without a vessel, all who have offered something without hope of reward, all who have spoken through art what their mouths could not safely say. You were the beginning, but they are the continuation. And in every hum, every bow drawn across string, every finger pressed gently to fret or key, you are there again. Not in glory, in presence. The Queen's story, too, lives on, but as shadow and contradiction. Some textbooks remember her as a power-hungry foreigner, others as a champion of justice, some as both, some as neither. But the stories rarely ask about her heart. They note her strategies. They analyze her letters. They dissect her alliances. But they do not speak of her alone at night. They do not speak of the melody she asked for. They do not speak of the way she listened. Only you knew that part. And you kept it, not as leverage, but as devotion. Even now, you keep it. Because hers was not a love that could survive sunlight. It was the kind that needed the hush of the corridor, the flicker of the brazier, the echo of your song in the stillness after betrayal. It was the kind that does not survive being named, only played. There will come a time decades or centuries from now when someone will believe they've discovered you. A researcher, perhaps, will find a reference buried in the accounts of a steward, payment to the Queen's musician, unnamed, for services rendered during the feast of St. Denis. They will circle it in red. They will write an article. It will be read, then forgotten, because your story resists discovery. It does not want to be solved. It wants to be felt, known not in the mind, but in the marrow. And it is being known, all the time, by people who will never know your name. A man proposes to his partner under a tree blooming with white flowers. He's nervous, clumsy. He stumbles over his words. But before he speaks, he pulls out a tiny Bluetooth speaker and plays a piece he found online. A medieval melody. Just a fragment. He doesn't know why he chose it. He only knows it made him cry. She says yes before he can even ask. Because she heard the song. Because it said everything he couldn't. Because some melodies speak the oldest languages. Because love is not always about what is said. Sometimes it's only about what is played. You did not choose greatness. You did not seek to alter the course of history. But you did. Not with a sword. Not with a proclamation. But with a note. With a pause. With the quiet dignity of presence. You were there. When she needed you. When the world cracked. When love, fragile and nameless, tried to breathe. You were there. And now still you are. And now, at last, the final chord fades. The strings have grown quiet. The fire in the brazier has turned to ember. The corridors are empty again. The Queen's chamber is sealed, the torchlight gone. There is no court now, no banners, no betrayal, no title to cling to, no secrets left to carry. Only the echo, only the hush that comes when a story has finally been told. You are no longer the boy in the hallway, nor the man with the letter tucked beneath his heart. You are no longer the shadow who listened while others ruled. You are no longer the lover unnamed, the voice unheard, the hand that never reached for what it wanted. That time has passed. You lived it well. Now you are something simpler. A breath, a stillness, a resting place. She, too, has quieted. Her eyes no longer search across battlefields. Her hands no longer write letters to unreachable brothers. Her crown has been set down. Her veil has been folded. The lily you once gave her, if only in spirit, rests now at her side, eternal in silence. And you, musician, rest too. You have played your last song, not in defeat, not in despair, but in peace, because it reached her, because she heard, because it was enough. Let the candle burn low now. Let the night fold gently over your shoulders. Let the centuries hold you in their quiet, without fear. Your story is safe. Your music remains. You may sleep.